Welcome back to our course on distributed algorithm. We are going to handle in this lecture, it's a series of units, the problem of sequence consensus and multi-Paxos. So in this unit, we are going to present agreement on sequences of values. And also in next units, we'll also present associated algorithms. So the consensus specification and its associated Paxos algorithm that we just described in the previous lecture was about agreeing on a single value. However, most applications will need to agree on actually a sequence of values. So consider, for example, atomic broadcast, where processes broadcast messages, and then the messages are delivered to all nodes, and these have to be delivered in the same order. So here we are talking about agreement on a growing sequence of values. Or think about a replicated state machine, where we have a set of replicas, and we have a series of commands to be executed on these replicas, and the commands are such that all the replicas are going to execute the sequence of commands in the same order. So the goal of these units is to show a relatively complete and efficient algorithm for sequence consensus that is easy to understand, and we call this algorithm Sequence Paxos, and sometimes it's called Multi-Paxos, but this is a variant of Multi-Paxos that's called Sequence Paxos. Okay, so hang on now. So what is the motivation we want to have? We wish to implement a replicated state machine or a total order broadcast. And our processes need to agree on a sequence of commands or a sequence of messages. And the standard approach is to use actually Paxos for single value consensus as a starting point, and then to use multiple of these single shot Paxos to address a sequence of commands. The algorithm we are going to develop in the end is important for a wide range of applications. It is the heart of many cloud and coordination services, including Zookeeper, that's an open source, and Chappy, which is a service at Google, which is a service that coordinates other services in data centers. It's also used in scalable key value stores, where you want to implement semantic that is stronger than just performing gets and puts, reads and writes. For example, if you would like to implement atomic swap blocks, barriers, and many other services. So let us remember single value consensus. So the properties of single value consensus. The first property is called validity, which says the decided value should be one that is proposed. Uniform agreement, which says no two processes decide different values, or all processes have to basically agree or decide on the same value. Integrity, which says that any process decides only once, and termination, which says every correct process eventually decides a value. So here is what we have. We have a consensus, a single value consensus abstraction, and we want to use it now to specify consensus on a sequence of values. So here is our first trial. Each process waits until all commands are known. It orders the command in a sequence. It proposes its sequence, that is one propose, and then execute commands once a sequence is decided. That is the last thing we have done. So, of course, as you can see, this approach has serious drawbacks. What are the drawbacks? Is that we cannot execute the commands until the sequence of commands are decided and known. Second, that's not actually what we want. This is completely not practical. It's not incremental. What we really need is to agree on a growing sequence of commands. So here is our second trial, which is basically use single value consensus algorithm for agreeing on a single command at a time. So consensus is agreement on a single value. Let us try to use Paxos, and we organize the algorithm in rounds. So what happens at each round? So the first thing that happens is that a proposer selects a command. He's at round I. So a proposer selects a command that is not decided in the previous rounds. Okay, so it's not decided in round I to I-1. And then this proposer proposes C for slot I. He waits until a decision is made. So it could be that command, it should be some other command. And it says it decided on CD at slot I. Fine. Then you add this CD to the set of decided command. It is also, you know, that this is decided at slot I. And you move to the next round. So in the next round, if C is not decided, that means that C is not CD. Then you try C again in the next round, and so on. So that is a reasonable algorithm. In fact, this algorithm works. That is the most important thing. And we have used a single value consensus protocol, for example, like Paxos, to decide on that. But we have some problems here. Here's our algorithm, as you remember. The most important things to notice is that a proposer selects a command C not decided in previous rounds and waits until a decision is made. And waits until a decision is made, if you just remember our old Paxos single thread algorithm, it means it has to wait for basically 2 rounds. One as the prepare round, this part, and one is the accept round. We are going to come back to remind you later with single value Paxos, but for the point is that you understand that a node or a process has to wait until it moves second round. So in a sense, this algorithm is sequential. Basically, all nodes are more or less running in a lockstep fashion. The problem is that in order to select a command at round I, a proposer has to know what has been agreed on the previous rounds. And that is what imposes this kind of sequentiality of the algorithm. And if you think about it, and we were going to show now, any naive approach to try to make this algorithm more efficient by pipelining, for example, proposals, will end up with some problem. And we are going to show one of these problems, which is basically the same proposal C might end up decided in different slots. The same proposal C might be decided in slot 3, or it might be decided in slot 5. So let us have a look. Just a comment, many people try to pipeline this algorithm in what is commonly known as Multi-Paxos, but there where things get complicated. So here is our situation. So let us take an example with this. We said it's not easy to pipeline proposals. So assume the following. We have 2 proposers, P1 and P2, and we just show one learner. One learner is the learners, if you remember, is the one that has to learn what things has been chosen or decided. And we naively do what we just said. We pipeline the proposed commands. So P1 pipelines command C1, and then for slot 1, C2 for slot 2, C for slot 3, and later on it somehow crashed or gets disconnected. And we now look to P2. P2 decides C1 to C1 is he got the information, it is decided. C1 is decided for slot 1, C2 is decided for slot 2. He doesn't know that P1 have proposed something for slot 3, so he proposes B for slot 3, and he thinks that this guy P1 has crashed or is not connected, and he continues. So B is different from C now, okay, and he continues proposing B4 for slot 4, and then he proposes C again for slot 5. If you think about single value consensus, we have two separate instances. One where we have contending proposals. One is proposing C and the other is proposing B. This is completely separate from the instance that is instance 5, where C is also proposed there. So it might be very well for slot 3 that C gets decided. And it might be also very well for slot 5 that C also gets decided. So what do we have now? We have a situation where we have one command decided into multiple slots. And that is a problem for us, because we want to have a unique sequence of commands. You can see here that P2 does not know that P1 proposed C at slot 3. And of course, this is where the proposals are decided. This is when you know that C is decided. This is, you know also that C is decided again, but in different slots. And what I'm showing here is a situation at this point. Okay, so again, just to summarize what is the problem, we need to agree on each command. That is fine. This is handled by Paxos. Single value Paxos handle this well. But we also need to agree on a sequence of commands. We agree on the sequence, not only on a single value. That is actually a mismatch with the consensus specification. Because the specification talks about a single value, but here we want to talk about sequences. So, and in particular, what we want is we want to agree on a growing sequence of commands. Let's look at the consensus mismatch. And just to understand that the specification of consensus here is not the one that we really need. Think about one of the properties of single value consensus, which says, it's called integrity. Integrity is a property which says that a process can decide at most one value, which means we cannot change our mind once we decide it. But in fact, that is not the case. What we want here is that we don't want to change what have been decided before, but we want to extend what have been decided before with more information that is unique. Okay, that's very important. Notice that. And this is allowed in what we call sequence consensus. Sequence consensus. So what we want is a specification which could say you can decide again if the new decided sequence is in fact an extension of previously decided sequence. So let us look now to the specification of sequence consensus. But just before looking to that, so to remind you, one single shot consensus, well, validity, uniform agreement, integrity, and termination, where every correct process eventually decides the value. Okay, fine. So this, you have this. Now we are going to have corresponding properties for sequence consensus. We will talk about now sequence consensus properties. And here is the point. So what is validity here? In sequence consensus, we are trying to agree on growing sequences. So the first property that we want to have is that if a process P decides a value V, and so the value is a sequence, then V is a sequence of proposed commands without duplicates. That's a very important point. Without duplicates. Remember that. Uniform agreement now. If a process P decides on a value U, and another process Q decides on a value V, then we want to guarantee that one of these is a prefix of the other. Prefix is like initial sequence of the other, basically. Then integrity, and that is quite interesting. Now we want to be able to decide more than once. And in this case, we say that a process P decides U, and if it later decides on V, then we want to have U as a prefix of V. V is a longer sequence than U, but contains all the elements in order that are in U. And termination, now tell us if a command is proposed. So command is proposed, then eventually every correct process will decide on a sequence containing that command. So that is great. Now we have another service we call it sequence consensus, and our goal is to implement this service. Just let us look first to the interface of this service. So sequence consensus, again, it's a box. We call it sequence consensus. A process can propose a command, and initially it can get a decide on a sequence of commands. So it proposes a command. So this is a request event, and then it decides on a sequence of commands. Once it proposes another command, it will decide again on a longer sequence of commands. That is the point. So here we have decisions are happening by growing sequence of commands. And what we are going to do, mainly this lecture, what is good enough, is we are going to talk about abortable sequence consensus. Abortable sequence consensus, which also we are going to have another event which is called abort. Abort will say we did not succeed in proposing a value. That's also an output event or indication event. We are going to later consider another specification, which the decide part, or the indication event, the output event, will not be a sequence of commands, but it will be commands, one command at a time. So we are going to have something like decide, first command we call it C1, then later we are going to get another output event called decide C2, and so on. And instead of saying first decide on a sequence C1, later decide on sequence C1, C2. So let us now look to a roadmap of what we are going to do. And in the next unit, we are going to present an algorithm which we call Sequence Paxos. It will be very easy to understand this algorithm because it will be derived from the Paxos, the single value Paxos algorithm, but satisfying the sequence consensus specification, and we can say it is a variant of Multi-Paxos. Later, we are going to have units discussing the correctness of the algorithm, and units, which a number of units actually, that is going to discuss how we are going to efficiently transform this algorithm by a series of transformation steps that makes it a very, very efficient algorithm. The final product is a very efficient algorithm. So please just hang on.